kicked off a third round for the Twilight Zone after a pair of successful seasons. In between seasons 2 and 3, Rod Serling picked up another Emmy win for his writing, while cinematographer George T. Clemens received one himself for his work behind the camera. That's not to mention a few other awards the show won during this time period. It was around here that CBS began to consider expanding the Twilight Zone into an hour format. While they eventually did this in Season 4, the idea was kept at bay for Season 3, and the series retained its half-hour runtime. Serling's original pitch for the show actually included hour-long episodes, but at this point, he was happy to keep what he called a vignette approach. Having written the bulk of the series this far in and finding it difficult to maintain quality, Rod was starting to feel fatigued. Serling was quoted as saying, "You start borrowing from yourself and making your own cliches. I noticed that more and more." End quote. He got a break here though, as 2 was actually written by the episode's director. There are reports that it originally wasn't supposed to lead off Season 3 though. Instead, the grave may have been meant to open up this batch of installments, followed by the obsolete man. The former ended up airing as the 7th episode of the new season, and the latter was of course the finale of Season 2. I'm not sure how accurate this information is, but it was talked about on 2's Blu-ray commentary track. Funnily enough, if The Grave did premiere Season 3, it would have still featured the same writer-director as this episode. Before we get into the installment itself, let's talk about some of the aesthetic changes this third season brought us. There is a new intro. It only changes a couple words of Rod's narration from Season 2 and keeps Marius Constant's signature theme, but instead of the sun being revealed through fog and setting behind that black line, we get 19 seconds of a false spiral illusion shrinking into the distance. A new Twilight Zone title card then comes into focus and breaks apart, leading us into every episode. The false spiral illusion became somewhat synonymous with the show afterwards, so you could say this was an important change. That new Twilight Zone title card altered the font to something very standard. They did this previously in the short-lived second Season 1 intro. It only appeared in front of a handful of episodes and was corrected the next season. However, they stick with this one for the entirety of Season 3. The whole thing is rather basic compared to what came before and especially what followed in Seasons 4 and 5, so it might be my least favorite of all the original series introductions. 2 was also the first episode to feature the title, producer, writer, and director on screen after Rod's narrator appearance. This would be the standard for just about every installment from here on out. I like that addition personally, it just felt like it gave each episode a little prestige. In an unspecified time of a post-apocalyptic world, a deserted city stands. It's been 5 full years since a human being has walked the streets, but on the first day of the 6th year, that changes. A woman, wearing the outfit of a soldier, enters the city. As she scavenges the dilapidated buildings and observes the blight around her, a man, wearing a different nation's soldier uniform, encounters her. They immediately fall into a scuffle with the man winning out. Soon after, he tries his very best at offering peace to the woman of his enemy nation. She's reluctant, and the pair are distrusting of each other. But with no evidence that any other person is even living, they weigh the options of cooperation and survival, or loyalty to their now destroyed countries. Montgomery Pittman was back in the director's chair after the fan-favorite installment Will the Real Martian Please Stand Up, the previous season. As mentioned in my review of that one, Pittman wrote a few of the episodes he directed, starting with 2. This put him in rarefied air as the only person to write and direct the same piece. Interestingly, he originally started out as an actor before transitioning to writing. After seeing his stories butchered by directors he didn't agree with, he began directing his own scripts to make sure they were done right. Much respect to him for taking those steps and doing it all. Instead of shooting at MGM like usual, producer Buck Houghton set up this show to be filmed at the recently closed Hal Roach Studios. The street set there was already broken apart and heavily worn down, making it easier for the crew to set up shop for this particular story. They apparently didn't have to do much to make it look like a post-apocalyptic city. It worked out because it comes off great in the episode. This backlot was actually torn down not too long after the production wrapped. We got some serious star power with a pre-Death Wish Charles Bronson and a pre-Bewitched Elizabeth Montgomery as the featured players here, only referred to as man and woman since their characters aren't given names. The acting is pretty solid, especially since there was minimal dialogue. The first words outside of Rod's narration aren't spoken until the 9-minute mark.
Here, invader. Eat. Eat. The only reason I can see for our fighting is that your uniform is a different color than mine.
Bronson's character speaks English, but as Rod mentioned in his opening,
The signposts are in English, so that we may read them more easily. But the place is the Twilight Zone.
this wasn't meant to be any specific nation, but the allusions are there with Bronson's English and the lone word Elizabeth Montgomery says in the whole story.
Procrastinate.
Now, I've heard from the commentary track and a couple other sources that that line is Russian for pretty. I tried typing it into the old Google machine, but I couldn't verify this. Any Russian speakers out there know if this is true? Leave a comment and let me know. If it is Russian, I'm sure this was meant as a bit of a nod to the Cold War between the US and Russia at the time, and what could happen. Bronson's character mentions there are no more armies, eliminating a reason for them to fight amongst themselves. He tries to make peace with the woman who can't understand him, and it's a tough sell. Even tougher after the pair come across a couple working guns, upping the apprehension. Later, the dress that Montgomery's character supposedly called pretty is given to her by the man, and she goes to change into it in a derelict army recruiting office. Reluctantly, she steps inside and sees all the propaganda posters for her enemy country's military. Something inside her snaps, and she fires a few warning shots at the man outside. Yes, those are laser blasts. Another interesting choice to make this feel like it doesn't have a time period. Seeing all of these conflicting emotions go through the woman's head with just her face to display them made Montgomery's performance unique. She's more of the standout, in my opinion. If you only know her as the blonde-haired Samantha from Bewitched, this is a good example of what her range was as an actor. After chasing the man off with gunfire, the woman seemingly chooses to go it alone. The following day, the man steps out in civilian clothes, attempting to leave the city. He's surprised to see the woman re-emerge, and tells her to
Go away. Go away!
She then reveals herself to be wearing the dress from earlier. An obvious play at a truce, the man accepts, and the pair walk off into the unknown together. This was a well-done story overall. I don't think it's on par with some of the best, but it has a tone all its own, and the acting was of decently high quality. I think the real star of the show was the set. It definitely felt like a lived-in, destroyed world, and helped in general with the believability. The more optimistic ending was also a nice way to wrap things up in a show where these kinds of settings often led to worse conclusions for the characters involved. I'll give it a light recommendation, but if you skip it, I wouldn't say that's a crime. There's plenty more to get into as we traverse Season 3 in the Twilight Zone.
Procrastinate.